Alrighty, let's get this one underway. Thank you everyone for joining me today. My name is Craig Hull. I'm a senior systems engineer based in Perth. I predominantly cover the enterprise patch for ANZ. I'd like to thank you and welcome you to this session around the hybrid cloud backup strategies with the Veeam Data Platform. Just a bit of housekeeping before we go too far into it. You'll notice you're automatically muted on joining. Please stay on mute. If you have any questions or anything like that, can you please use the question function in the GoToMeeting? Paste it in there, and what I'll do is I'll break out at the end and answer the questions. Please refrain from using the chat if you can, unless I've got an issue or problem, please post it in there. As I said, I think you can all hear me. But if there's any problems with audio, please let me know in the chat, or you can post it in the questions if need be. All right, let's get underway. I'm really going to talk around the hybrid landscape and multi-cloud, the realities of these days. So 92% of organizations have gone multi-cloud. What does the multi-cloud look like? I guess in a couple of different instances over the years, I've seen cloud being adapted in different ways. Predominantly, customers have gone directly into cloud platforms, the forklift approach of moving infrastructure straight in. And a lot of the times, they got a very expensive outcome, or they got a outcome that wasn't what they thought it would be. So they've really kind of changed that model now to kind of bring the workloads back down again, or keep them on-prem and look at what they can move into the cloud at a later date. And it doesn't simply have to be infrastructure as a service cloud. It can be obviously the SaaS or PaaS platforms, Microsoft 365, Salesforce, those kind of platforms as well. 80% of them are in a hybrid cloud state now. Obviously, lessons learned, moving things in the cloud, maybe not the right suit for certain applications. So we've seen kind of a split now, I guess, of some predominantly edge use cases of workloads still retaining on-prem. 41% of production servers are looking to move within the next couple of years into the cloud platforms. And this really comes down to looking at what you're doing and what you want to get as an outcome with the cloud platform. And it may not be simply the forklift approach. It may be that you need to redevelop applications into containers, into Kubernetes, or you're looking to go into a SaaS platform for that application instead of just a traditional infrastructure as a service. So a little bit about Veeam and how we fit in the picture here. We're really around data freedom now. You own your data, and we want to make sure that we provide you any cloud as an option. So that might be traditionally a private cloud, your own cloud itself, your own traditional data centers, as well as the clouds, the hyperscalers, the Azures, the AWSs, the Googles. So what we've done is really put together a solution to cover both bases. So around protecting the cloud native workloads within Azure, AWS, and Google, snapshot integrated base backups using native object within the platform. Now branching out to more SaaS backups, obviously looking at things like Microsoft 365, which we started with, moving into Salesforce, and we're aggressively looking at different SaaS plays year on year to kind of go into. Cloud mobility has always been a big belief in us that you need to be able to move that data where it makes more sense. So we're really good at containerizing those workloads and be able to give you options to either restore it to such things like AWS and Azure, or to pull them out of those cloud platforms and put them back to VMware, Hyper-V, Nutanix AHV. Increasing the protection around Kubernetes. We're seeing a lot of customers starting to look at breaking out their applications into containers, being able to back up the Kubernetes stack itself. So all the load balancing, the data, all the in-between layers that give you a full solution to protect those workloads. And then we've got the other side, leveraging the cloud for the data protection. So utilizing things like object storage, being able to back up to object and then tier it off to Azure, Azure Archive, the glaciers in those cloud platforms to kind of reduce, I guess, the cost associated with that, as well as kind of look at a new way to do protection for long-term retention away from tape and traditional kind of backup strategies. Ransomware protection as well. Obviously, that's a key thing this day and age, being able to make things immutable. We led with AWS around the S3 immutability function with object lock, obviously enhancing that more and more with such things as Azure immutability, and looking towards other platforms that we can support it on in the cloud. Disaster recovery. So a lot of customers these days ask me about using the cloud platforms as their disaster recovery location. Yep, definitely a solution we can cater for. something we're seeing a trend that people want to have that offline disaster recovery. They don't want to pay for it until they use it. So cloud is a really good use case for that. And allow us to migrate and modernize your applications. So be able to take what you're doing on-prem, being able to back it up and restore it into Azure, AWS, Google, and making it modernized, making sure that you're getting the best out of that application, modify it the way it works, hook it into things like SQL PaaS and other applications in the cloud to kind of optimize it. So I want to set the stage here a little bit about what's happened with, I guess, the rise of the cloud platform. And obviously you can see there, you've got the scale up mode and scale out mode, and that really comes down to what the cloud is built around, the scaling out. So what we've seen over time is that, if you need something that will scale out to infinity, I guess you could say, as well as can utilize your bandwidth, externally, but obviously it's not, a low latency, object storage has become the kind of key for that. And that's where we see, obviously, the long-term, the short-term kind of aspects of backup working really well. Obviously, file systems fit well in some areas, but obviously you're limited to what you can do with capability around capacity and bandwidth of your on-prem solutions. So, but you can get, obviously, this running on Flash and different arrays kind of improve performance. We see that as a target you can use, but obviously there's limitations around your scalability. And finally, we've got block storage, additional block storage. A lot of people will invest in this for your on-prem component. Obviously, flash arrays and things like that will give you very low latency in the sense of getting that data in there, but it's more traditionally seen for your front-end workloads. I have seen use cases in this day and age where customers have bought flash arrays for their short-term backups, making it immutable. And really that's around that rapid restore. If you're hit with a ransomware attack and you want to get that data back quickly and efficiently, you may have 30 days on a flash array, and that allows you to then instant recovery at scale quite quickly. And then if anything's further required after that, tiering from things like object storage, so instant recovery from the object store after a period of time that you may be in that outage. So there's quite a few options of where that whole fits in the solution. So what we've done is set the stage. Now we're looking towards backing up more and more components within cloud platforms themselves. AWS is obviously the leader kind of in what we see in the cloud marketplace. We support most of the kind of, I guess, mainly used features within that platform, your EC2, Elastic Blob, RDS, so your database systems, your MySQLs, your Postgres, the Elastic File System, S3, the VPCs, which is an interesting one. So be able to back up the whole configuration of your VPC and virtual networking, your gateways, all that kind of information. Really, really important stuff that's kept in there. And also looking at the outposts, so your last bit of your edge networking provided by AWS, so looking to be able to back that up as a solution as well. Azure, again, very similar. VMs, obviously managed as Azure SQL was a new one we brought out very recently. Azure Files in the last release, and now looking to Azure Blob as well to be able to support that as part of it. Google, or probably the smaller of all the cloud platforms, but we do support a lot of the main kind of features in there. Obviously, the traditional compute, persistent disks, the MySQL, and the cloud storage within their platform itself. So a little bit of interesting information here. Has your organization brought back any workloads from public cloud to on-premise? Interesting one, and this really comes down to the comment I made at the beginning there around lift and shift, taking what you did on-prem and moving to cloud, expecting a better outcome. A lot of customers I've seen in the past end up in a hybrid state after doing that, because traditional on-prem workloads don't work necessarily in the same way. It may make more sense to have applications closer to the users, especially if they're high-intensive databases or their directory or logging services. They may need those things. So interesting statistics there. So 12% no have not brought those workloads back down on-prem. Very low number. Yes. We've brought them online during disaster, then brought them back on premise, and that's an interesting one. So 40% have brought them back online disaster, and then brought them back on premise. So yeah, really interesting one. Yes, migrated from an on-premise to a cloud, but decided to bring it back on premise. So that's the interesting one. It's a very high number, 43% of them did that kind of scenario. Yes, developed in cloud already, plan to run in production within a data center. So that's interesting. It leveraged the cloud to develop the applications, but then use the traditional thing. And what we see is a lot of customers start with cloud because they think that's the best opportunity to run their application, but they find out the way the application works from that, it doesn't make more sense. It makes more sense to kind of bring it on-prem and run it from there, maybe on their own Kubernetes stack, rather than using it in the cloud. Every business is different. There's different outcomes, for having things in different spots. Predominantly, if you start a new company these days, most of the time it'll be done predominantly in cloud, but we still see a lot of customers bring a small workload back on-prem. So that's really that hybrid model. Now I'm going to jump into a few different topics and areas, I guess, around Veeam. So leveraging the cloud for secure backups. Feature was probably brought out in, I think, 9.5 update 4 was leveraging scale-out backup repositories to utilize object storage in the cloud platform. We've been enhancing that through version 10, 11, and obviously 12 are just released. So what we brought into the picture is immutable backups to the cloud. So that's obviously been around for a while now, but obviously enhancing what we can do in that space. We led with AWS S3 and the object lock in there to be able to do that as part of our platform. Great success with that. Recently, we've just, with V12, we've brought out Veeam immutability for Azure. So now you can write to Azure Blob Storage and make that immutable as well. Looking to other platforms as well after this, we really need the things like Google and stuff to start supporting immutability natively in their object storage. Once they do have that functionality, we'll look to kind of expand that into that platform. Mutable backups within the cloud. Okay, so this is a really new feature. I'm not sure if everyone's looked at this yet, but if you are using our cloud native tools, so Veeam Backup for Azure, AWS, or Google, we now have support in Azure and AWS to use the immutability function in the object storage. So now you can turn on that functionality. So trying to give you the same like for like that you have with your on-premise workloads being tiered into object storage. Leveraging the cloud, obviously, for logical separation. That's really a big thing we need to do now within cloud platforms. A cloud platform now embraces all of your infrastructure. It's no longer just one target. It's your networking, your security, your firewalls, everything. So we need to be able to break that down again, same as what we did on-premise. We need to have isolated networks, depending on which cloud you're with, different accounts in AWS, resource groups in Azure, security groups to isolate those, even traditional old firewalls, that may be virtualized in the cloud platform, looking to isolate things between each other, as well as using different storage accounts between object stores. So don't think just single account, one object store. Having multiple different object stores with different accounts on them enhances the security. Yeah, as you write that data in the cloud platform, if something does get compromised, it can't compromise the other object stores. So little things that we kind of need to think about when we do go within the cloud. Authentication and management. So we've kind of made a few changes in this space. Looking for the least privileged access, identity access management, credential ordering and rotation, role-based authentication, and multi-factor authentication probably being the big ticket there. As with V12, we've added in MFA into the physical console. So now if you've got people with multiple consoles installed, they'll get prompted for MFA authentication. That authentication integrate with Google or Microsoft MFA. It can also be done offline. So if you're thinking about things in your DMZ offline, you can get a little QR code that spots on the screen that you can scan to then factor with the phone. So it really giving you a full kind of security picture around the platform. This has already been done in the backup for Azure, AWS, and Google appliances, so it's just kind of completing the whole solution. Isolate backups, so cross accounts, and cross-region, cross-platform. As I mentioned before, this is that isolation that we need to do between all of them. We need to make sure that we've got multiple different accounts, multiple different regions, multiple different platforms within that mix to make it harder for people to compromise the platforms. Enhancing the encryption capabilities as well. So now leveraging the key management services. I believe we do that in AWS and Azure right now, so you can leverage that if you want to. Key rotations, and you obviously leveraging the 256 AES encryption algorithms to enhancing security end-to-end. A little bit around topic 2, cost-efficient storage. This is where I get asked most of the time, what is my solution going to cost? Really tough one to answer easily. So I'll talk a little bit about why and when we should use object storage. There's a couple of changes with version 12 that I don't know if everyone's fully aware of. Traditionally, your performance tier was your disk-based target in your data center. That was going to be comprised of traditional disk, block storage, NFS, CIF-based shares, things like that you kind of put together. As of V12, we now have the capability to add in those object stores. So any S3 compatible on-prem object store. So there's a heap of them out there. Every vendor's got one. A couple that you can think of, the Cloudian, Scality, Object First. Those guys are available to do if you don't want to go to a traditional kind of hyperscaler. We can also add in the hyperscalers as well. So the Amazon S3, IBM, Azure, and Google platforms now as your performance tier. So what you'll see, there's a couple of green lines going through. You'll see one green line that shoots all the way through capacity to the archive tier. What we're giving you the capability now is with S3 and Azure to be able to bypass the capacity tier in the cloud completely. So straight from kind of on-prem or object storage in the cloud already as your performance tier, straight into the archive tier, eliminating that need to go to a capacity tier model and a scale-out backup repository. So kind of refining that movement. But if you still want to have a disk-based target, a Linux hardened repository or something in your performance tier, you can still follow the same kind of configuration tier through capacity to the archive kind of that way as well. For ones we don't have archive tier, you'll see that there's only S3 Glacier and Azure Blob at this point in time. You can tier that obviously into capacity tier in those cloud platforms. So very much just moving it between, say, Google Cloud Platform Storage to another Google Cloud Platform Storage in a different bucket itself. So really kind of completing the picture there around the solution. And it kind of comes down to for the why would you do certain ones over the other? The reason we've chosen to put in the object storage in the performance tier is that we see a large rise in the object storage, and that kind of is driving us to make that change. Optimizing object storage investments. So this is really around getting the best bang for buck, I guess you could say, without a cloud platform. It really is around a few different ideas and methodologies. I'll kind of go through a few of them here. So creation, retention, deletion. Obviously, that's not really a clear picture. So I'll give you an idea with customers that I've seen, some ideas I've kind of passed on. It's really understanding what data needs to go out to cloud platforms to help kind of optimize that cost. If you think about it, traditionally, when you've backed up to, say, a tape medium, you've kind of taken the, all the backups, stick it onto tape. It may contain domain controllers, file servers, SQL servers. It may have management servers. They all go to tape. Tape's cheap, right? But now, when we're talking about cloud-based object, we need to optimize what we're sending there. Do we have an understanding of what compliance we need across the board for the file servers, the SQL servers? What data is actually needed to be kept for a certain period of time? So we end up creating kind of a model of multiple different policies to meet that cycle. So you might have a simple as a critical and a non-critical. The critical go to a local disk or object storage. They're kept for 30 days. They then tier up into S3 or blob storage, say, for 90 days, and they tier off to the archive where we keep grandfather, father, son for 7 years, right? Because that data is critical. It might be financial data or anything like that for compliance. Then we have a non-critical one where we simply just don't move it into that archive. We just put it to that disk or object. We tier it into another object. We just keep 30 days on each end. And that gives us an immutable copy, but we don't need to keep that in the cloud for longer, costing us money for the next 7 years. So it's about understanding what VMs you need to protect, what data you need to protect, and how long you need to keep each of those particular areas to kind of optimize the spend in the cloud platform. Obviously, then leveraging things and the lower costs. So if you do want to then tier and you want to keep it like a replacement for tape, your grandfathers, your monthlies, your yearlies, possibly your weeklies as well. Want to use things like cool tiers in Azure Blob, cold storage, that's kind of kept offline. Or archive, like Glacier Deep Archive, for example, Azure Archive, where you get the lowest kind of spend, but it's really around restoring individual objects, not restoring a VM. It's just a compliance thing that maybe you need some emails or records out of the system to kind of restore. Proactively calculate, so we always try to calculate the cost. So if anyone's using Veeam 1, you can use that to see exactly what you're storing out in those object stores and to work out the growth and then calculate what that's going to look like. So you'll get a picture of what that looks like in the solution, and then makes a conscious decision to be able to remove data if you need be to kind of optimize the costs in that platform. Other things we do in there, obviously compression. There's some new compression algorithms in version 12, sorry, that allow us to optimize even further with less CPU overhead. So something definitely worthwhile investigating. Change block tracking, so only checking the data that's changed, so leveraging that within Hyper-V, AHV, and obviously VMware, making sure that we're only moving the blocks that need change. So when we do tier between object or disk to clouds, we are only moving the change blocks, not the file data, the blocks. So we do what we call a block merge between the two and merge only blocks that have changed. That optimizes the transfer as well as the calls to the object storage. Inferior instances, so leveraging things like that in the cloud platform, you know, things you can shut down, remove. The other kind of component of that I mentioned at the beginning is disaster recovery as a service. We do have the ability to two-click restore into Azure, AWS, and Google. So be able to right-click either an on-prem disk, S3 storage, or using the public clouds. We can then do full recovery into those cloud platforms. So if you think of it like that, we're not charging for, you know, well, we're not charging you obviously, but the cloud's not going to charge you for compute because the backup file is just stored in object. So that's the only cost within the cloud platform. And when you do need to action your disaster recovery, you're basically doing a restore straight back into Azure. And once that VM starts powering on, then you're starting to charge for that. So kind of a cost reduction, I guess, in using the cloud as a disaster recovery point. Another thing that comes to mind here, Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator, a product that not a lot of people have, but a very powerful one, allows you to fully orchestrate as a version 6 into Azure. So we can do what we call Cloud DR, allowing you to click on a VM and automate the failover of that build process into Azure. So predefining all of your VMs, all the networking, all the security groups, the policies and things that make up in the cloud platform, all ready to go and click a button, fully automate that process. So that's really powerful. It's something that I recommend everyone kind of look into within the cloud platform, see what makes sense there. So topic 3, it's not complex, it's comprehensive. Interesting view. I guess in Veeam, we're really about keeping it simple, yeah? It's always about kind of reducing complexity, but giving you more options and be able to drop away things when you don't need them. So why standardize on data protection? Obviously, it's a key thing. A lot of customers have a very dispersed network now with cloud-based things. You may be looking at things like Veeam Backup for Azure, sorry, not Veeam Backup for Azure, Azure Backup, AWS Backup. Those are very expensive platforms and very basic in what they give us functionality. We at Veeam believe that we can do it better on those platforms, and we do have a cost calculator to compare between what you're paying now, say for Azure, versus what we would be, including appliance that runs on the platform as well as licensing. And generally, we do come out quite a bit cheaper and give you a lot more functionality with the cloud platform. So really, it makes it much better to kind of simplify that and standardize on one data protection across the board. So if you're using Veeam Backup Replication on premise and you're using it in AWS or Azure using their native tools, have a look at what we can do in that area. We can then optimize what you're doing, as well as things like we can now take a copy out of that object storage you've backed up to with our appliances and stick it back on-prem, you know, and we can give you instant recovery back on-prem from those external storage as well. So really giving you more options to kind of recover, as well as in that hybrid model to get data out of the cloud platform back on-premise. Operationalize and monitoring of the orchestration. So hopefully everyone here has had a look at a Veeam One, a kind of monitoring analytics platform. It is basically a tool that kind of connects into all of the platforms and will give you a visualization of everything across the board that's going on. We've enhanced this with version 12 to kind of give you more insight into things like Microsoft 365, so looking at the SaaS platforms now. So giving you a more picture about what's happening, not just from traditional infrastructure as a service within the on-prem or cloud, but giving the visualization into the cloud workloads, whether it be SaaS, PaaS, or any other platform. We can start seeing what's going on within those platforms. Then orchestration as well, being able to then move those up. So Veeam Backup and Replication obviously has functionality to restore into those platforms, but also have that, as I mentioned before, disaster recovery orchestrator, as well as a piece to automate and migrate. So if you think about hooking those together, you can now use Veeam One to automate your failover into DR. So looking at scenarios, maybe you've had a ransomware attack, maybe you've got an application that fails offline, you can create custom rules in the actual Veeam One to monitor that and then automatically fail over and orchestrate that into a cloud platform. So really powerful piece of technology. Make the flexibility work for you. So this is kind of key to the architecture of Veeam. So if you look at Veeam across the board, what we have, we've got our on-prem solution in Veeam Backup and Replication. We've got our external kind of cloud appliances. So for Azure, AWS, and Google, we've got Microsoft 365, backup for Salesforce, and new product we brought out. These are all modular, so we're really making it flexible. So instead of bringing this traditional old backup methodology of, one thing does everything and everything's in one thing, you need all these monstrous servers to run everything. Yeah, Veeam's taking an approach of where you just build on what you need. So if you need a, Microsoft 365, build that on, stick it in Azure if you want to, stick it on-prem, whatever makes more sense. We've kind of got that model, and we've kind of introduced, obviously, with the cloud-based stuff with Azure and AWS, is now we can have an appliance running up there. They can scale up, scale down, depending on how you want to. But if you choose to leave, in the sense of we saw that a lot of customers are moving out of some cloud platforms, maybe you've gone into Azure, maybe you're migrating to AWS, no longer need that, we'll just drop that component off, yeah? And this falls really well into our universal licensing model, where we're licensing with workloads, yeah? We're no longer are we licensing socket-based or anything like that. We're now just licensing the physical, the virtual machine, the NAS storage, whatever it is that makes it up, which means you don't need to go and worry about where your licensing sits and how you license. If you want to consume, move to, say, Azure, your licensing moves with you. Universal, so as you migrate that workload into the cloud, it now moves the license with it. If you want to pull it back down again, the license migrates with it. So really completes the picture around that portability, mobility, and flexibility you get with Veeam. It's my last slide. I've whizzed through this, so hopefully people got a lot of questions. So I guess why Veeam values portability. Really, it's about no lock-in. Veeam has changed its kind of area of kind of what we believe backups should be, and now we've kind of embraced the data freedom, yeah? We're in the belief that you should have the options to stick data where you want to, and have the ability to move that data and bring it to where it needs to be. We've kind of enhanced that more and more, but right now you can now back up and restore, you can go across different cloud platforms. Things like Kubernetes as well. We can back up an on-prem Kubernetes stack, say on Tanzu. We can now pick that up and restore it into Azure, the AKS, or anything like that within a cloud platform. Completely hardware agnostic. A lot of customers use this as well for migrations between, say, VMware and Hyper-V, or to a cloud platform. And I've got a lot of successful customers that have used the Community Edition to do that process. So very powerful, kind of a good way to kind of migrate, keep your hybrid model available. That's kind of everything I was going to talk about today. I'll break out and kind of do some Q&A if there's any questions. There's a couple of handy kind of resources there on the screen. So if you want to join the Veeam Community Hub, please go ahead. Some great content on there, good podcasts and information there. Another website that's not on here to kind of log into is our knowledge base feed. It will give you security information. So if anyone's ever curious about where you get your security updates, we had one recently, but there was a day one found, and there was a patch release for that. There is an alert on there. If you can subscribe to that channel, you'll get the information you need. So I'll throw it open to any questions that anyone has. I don't see any yet, so feel free to ask them. I'll give it a few minutes. If anyone's got any ideas. Actually, another thing I didn't mention is another couple of methodologies that I've mentioned with the customers is around the gold, silver, bronze kind of thing for VMs as well. Seen that a few times. It does help kind of logically break out everything. And what happens is they go, well, how do you do that with a scale-out backup repository? Well, you end up having multiple scale-out backup repositories. So you simply just don't use one. You end up looking at the scale-out being a policy itself. And what you can do is actually target the same storage. Yeah. So if you target just a local disk drive or object store, you'll have multiple folders in there. Each folder can have a different retentional set or different data plugged into that, and different policies of tiering out. So create that how you want, and then kind of use multiple different ones to get in there. Can I cover these slides? Yep, I believe the slides will be available. It will be recorded this session, and then it will publish as part of that. So look out in your emails, it should be there. Beautiful. Any other questions? Are you planning to adding data movement for local Windows space? Good question. We are, once Microsoft supports immutability. Right now, the RFS file system doesn't support the immutability flag. The reason we can do it on the Linux hardened repositories is because in the XFS file system, there is a immutability flag, which we can leverage to turn on. So that's the kind of way of doing it. As in not Linux space. Yes, okay, I got you, yeah. So no, not yet, no. Remember, immutability is not done by Veeam, and that's probably the key, the thing. We leverage immutability on the other system. The reason we do that, if we get compromised, it's another layer in between to be able to get into that. So the idea is that, S3 in AWS, further in security, you can't really get access to the data center to compromise that data by pulling the disks out. So even further, it's further secured. Same thing, obviously the Linux system, we remove the root access, we kind of harden it that way around. When you're talking about Windows, very complicated to do with the administrational rights on there. Also, the file system doesn't support it. So once those kind of things get sorted, if Microsoft is planning to do that, then we will look at doing a Windows-based repository. But at this point, we just can't do it with their technologies. Is there any news on Veeam support for backup Oracle OCI VMs? So I get asked this a lot. Oracle is one of the smallest cloud platforms there is. So there's not much investment, unfortunately, in that platform. So we're obviously doing traditional agent-based. There is a new agent that's being worked on. It was released in V12 for backing up Azure and AWS. Instead of using the traditional agents, we have a cloud agent. The cloud agent will now directly connect to the endpoints in the back end of the cloud platform. So it allows you to traverse the back end infrastructure inside the cloud platform rather than an actual networking layer. We are looking to support that on Oracle because of the way they do their hypervisor. We don't really have access to doing snapshotting within their platform still yet. So we're looking to use the agent, but cloud agent in future releases. I haven't heard when that will be, probably looking at V13. We should have 12A out halfway through this year, but I'm not sure if it's part of that. How many folk use QNAP with AWS S3 local immunization? So do you mean targeting a QNAP and then tiering off to object storage? I actually have a customer that's doing that right now. They use the QNAP for 30 days and then tier it off to S3 as that. I assume that's what you mean, or do you mean using S3 instead of a QNAP? Either way, you still can accomplish it. Obviously, QNAP isn't as a high-end enterprise device, so it's obviously not going to be as good as, say, a traditional array or a flash array, but it definitely can do instant recovery and those kind of things. You can always get instant recovery from S3 storage as well. That's the same thing. But that's comes down to the speed of your internet connection, I guess, in the end, how quickly you can pull that data down, how many you can instant recovery at once. Cool, no more questions. Hopefully I've answered everything okay there. Feel free to either put in the chat or anything if I haven't answered that correctly to what you've written there. We'll give it one more minute if any questions come through. If not, feel free to drop off. Thank you very much for joining this. It was quick, but quick's always, kind of good with all us being busy these days. As I say, the slides we shared, there'll be a recording of this. If you want any more information, reach out to your local SEs. I'm based in Perth, so if anyone's on the call, reach out to myself or Jonathan Lavin, who's a territory manager if you are over east in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, any of those places, or Adelaide, actually, if you're in Adelaide, contact me as well, because that's my patch as well. But if you are over east, let me know if you need any contacts. I can put you in touch with the local SE team over there. Beautiful. All right, well, I'll leave it at that. Hope everyone has a great afternoon, and I will see you on future webinars. Thank you very much. See you later, everyone.